This former bus driver rose to become the president of Venezuela, and just 13 years later he was arrested after the US had doubled his bounty from $25 million to $50 million for any information leading to the arrest and/or conviction of Nicolas Maduro for being one of the largest narco-traffickers in the world and the leader of the organized system of highly ranked corrupt officials dubbed the Cartel de los Soles. In mid-2025, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro began deploying the military and arming the working-class civilian population against the looming threat of U.S. invasion. The U.S. had just blown up at least 5 vessels off of the Venezuelan coast, which was suspected to be drug-smuggling boats. The U.S. had further imposed an oil blockade targeting sanctioned oil tankers that were still operating in and out of Venezuela. This was not a veiled threat, and the US was not covert about its operations, as it had deployed naval vessels, submarines, off of the Venezuelan coast. In the early morning hours of January 3rd, 2026, the US launched airstrikes and raided Fort Tuna, which is one of Venezuela's largest military complex and where Nicolas Maduro was hiding in a false sense of security. The US Delta forces captured Maduro in just 2 hours and 28 minutes alongside his wife Celia Flores. The two were flown into the US to face drug trafficking charges that stemmed from his time in office from the early 2000s. In 2000, Nicolas Maduro was appointed a member of the Venezuelan National Assembly. In 2006, he rose up the ranks to be the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and by 2013, he was a vice president. After the demise of the longtime dictator Hugo Chavez in 2013, Nicolas Maduro ascended to become the president of Venezuela. In a now unsealed indictment, it's been unearthed throughout the period he was in office, Nicolas Maduro engaged in a relentless campaign of cocaine trafficking and distribution to the United States. The indictment alleges that around 2006 to 2008, whilst Maduro was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, he sold Venezuelan diplomatic passports to drug traffickers to assist the drug traffickers traffic the drugs from Mexico to Venezuela under diplomatic cover. He also coordinated the use of private planes to traffic the drugs. He would liaise with the Venezuelan ambassador to Mexico under the guise of a diplomatic mission who would ensure that the private planes that were loaded with the drugs arriving in Mexico would avoid scrutiny from law enforcement and from the military. But the sale of the diplomatic passports was the least appalling revelation. The indictment also unveils a bitter irony, as the man entrusted to lead the war on drugs in Venezuela was on the forefront of coordinating drug shipments. In 2007, the indictment alleges that Maduro's wife, Celia Flores, accepted a bribe to broker a meeting between a large-scale drug trafficker and the director of Venezuela's National Anti-Drug Office, Nestor Reverol Torres. The deal was to have the director of the anti-drug office ensure safe flight passage for the drug traffickers in exchange for accepting a $100,000 monthly bribe. This deal went on until 2015, when Reverol Torres was indicted and charged with narcotic offenses in New York. Reverol Torres is currently a fugitive of the law. The anti-drug office isn't the only office that was implicated. In 2006, the then director of Venezuela's military intelligence agency and the National Guard were involved in a shipment of 5.5 tons of cocaine. The cocaine was transported by vans to a hangar that was reserved for the Venezuelan president at Simon Bolivar International Airport in Caracas, Venezuela. Upon arrival of the drugs, the National Guard would load the cocaine onto the plane headed for Ciudad del Carmen Airport in the city of Campeche, Mexico. Despite the collaborative effort from the Venezuela's military intelligence to the National Guard, the elaborate flight plans that were used to evade being on the radar of law enforcement, Mexican authorities would crack down and end up seizing more than 5.5 tons of the cocaine that was being trafficked. In June 2025, the former director of Venezuela's military intelligence agency, Hugo Armando Carvajal Barrios, pled guilty to narco-terrorism, narcotics, and weapon offenses. Now, this wouldn't be the last time that tons of cocaine would be seized. In 2013, just months after Nicolas Maduro became president, 1.3 tons of cocaine worth 200 million euros was shipped through a commercial flight from the same Simon Bolivar International Airport, Caracas, Venezuela, to Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport in one of the biggest cocaine seizures ever on French territory. The French border police found 1.3 tons of drugs in 31 unregistered suitcases. France arrested 6 suspects and eventually nabbed 20 suspects, some of who were members of the Venezuelan National Guard. Back in Venezuela, to keep the heat off, Maduro orchestrated a scapegoating operation by arresting certain top military officials to divert and distract the public from his own involvement in the shipment and his cover-up. Currently, Nicolas Maduro is in custody facing narco-terrorism charges, cocaine importation conspiracy, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, and conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices. And his own family would lead to his downfall. 2 of Maduro's relatives had orchestrated a large cocaine shipment from Venezuela to Honduras. To traffic such a shipment, they liaised with a Mexican cartel boss who was with his assistant. The 2 relatives laid out the whole plan for the drug shipment and informed the Mexican cartel boss that the cocaine would be trafficked via a private plane that was based at Maduro's presidential hangar at the same Simon Bolivar International Airport under the control of the Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro. And with that recorded statement, they had implicated their uncle Nicolas Maduro in that cocaine shipment. The 2 relatives also told the Mexican cartel boss that the money that they would receive from the cocaine trafficking would be used to fund an election campaign for Nicolas Maduro's wife, Celia Flores. They needed about $20 million for the election campaign because Maduro desperately needed to gain control of Venezuela's National Assembly. The 2 relatives would fly on a private jet to Haiti to collect the initial multi-dollar payment for the first cocaine shipment consisting of about 800 kgs. But what they didn't know is that the Mexican cartel boss and the assistant they were confiding in were actually undercover DEA agents who recorded their conversation and ended up busting their drug shipment by liaising with the Haitian law enforcement officers to arrest the 2 relatives in Haiti. Following the arrest, the 2 relatives were charged, convicted, and sentenced in New York to 18 years in prison in 2016. But Venezuela didn't take the conviction and sentence lying down, but they also knew that they couldn't be up in arms against the USA, given that it was a superpower. So they appealed to emotion through what is called back-channel diplomacy. Both the US and Venezuela held secretive talks that resulted in what is considered the largest prison swap during the Biden administration. The US negotiated for the release of 7 American citizens who had been unlawfully detained in Venezuela. Out of the 7, 5 were oil executives that had been lured to a meeting with officials of the Venezuelan State Oil Corporation, and in the meeting, masked men barged into the room and took the oil executives. Now, whilst detaining the oil executives gave Maduro leverage, he knew when to fold them. Maduro released 7 US citizens in what he termed as a humanitarian gesture in exchange for his 2 relatives in 2022. Maduro is currently at the Metropolitan Detention Center and has pleaded not guilty to all charges.